Alright, y'all. We're back with another video. We are back with another reaction. Let's talk about it. So we are here with the top 100 players in the NBA as of current day. But my video is going to have a little twist. Since there's a certain somebody that's more than likely in the top 10 of this list, there's a certain somebody that says the throwback era, which is the 80s and the 90s, they had no skill. That players in the 80s and 90s wouldn't even survive in this era because they had no skill. So this is probably going to be like a part one, then a part two another time. We're going to look at the top 100 players in this list, and we're going to see who could survive in the 80s and 90s. And then we're going to look at the top 100 or 50 players in the 80s and 90s, and we're going to see out of that list who could play in the 2024 era. So, starting with Anthony Simons at 100. That was originally 85. Anthony Simons. 6'3" Simons is a small guard who could certainly be exploited defensively at times. Simons. No. Simons, I don't think he will make it in the 80s and 90s. I just don't see it. I just don't see it, bro. Maybe y'all do, but I don't see it. Chris Paul, he went from 76 to 99. It's time to hang it up. I will say Chris Paul, I believe, could play in the 80s and 90s because if Isaiah Thomas and John Stockton could play in that era, I think Chris Paul could play. Especially during his younger years with the Charlotte Hornets at the time that he was playing for them, and the Clippers. I think he could play in the 80s and 90s. This older Chris Paul, however, he would have been out the league playing grandfather, playing Udonis Haslem role, the Udonis Haslem role. But younger Chris Paul, when he was winning, I think, Rookie of the Year. No, not Rookie of the Year. He was on the cover athlete one of the 2Ks during his rookie years. I believe he could play in the 80s and 90s. Mike Conley. Yeah. He'll be a decent role player, though, but I think he could play in the 80s and 90s. Herbert Jones. He wasn't ranked and now made the 97th. No. I don't think Herbert Jones will even have a face scan. You know how 2K has, like, the older teams? I don't think he would have a face scan, to be honest with you. Al Horford, he'll be a good role player. I think he could play in the 80s. He might get away with some of the stuff. Probably 80s, 90s. Yeah, I think he could play. He'll be a good role player. But not nothing bigger than that. Keegan Murray, I think he'll be a pretty decent shooter in the 80s and 90s, but that's about it. He's 94th. He wasn't ranked last year. Brook Lopez. Yeah. Because I feel like if Tony Kukoc could play, I think Brook Lopez could at least come off the bench as a 6th man or 7th man off the bench. Especially as a stretch big, I think he could play. Jabari Smith. I don't know. Maybe. On the Rockets in the 90s. I don't know. I don't see it too much. Valanciunas. Nah, he'd probably be auditioning for Aquaman in the 90s. I don't see Valanciunas even being interested in basketball. Andrew Wiggins. Yeah. If this is 2022 Wiggins, I could definitely say that. But this Wiggins that takes vacation days halfway through the season, I don't think he would even be interested in playing in the NBA. Like, real spill. He probably would have got kicked off the team by now. This is the 80s and 90s. Swing the Rock Porter at 89. I see it. He could play in the 80s and 90s. Because I feel like if George Gervin was decent, he could play. Hartstein, I don't even know if he has a face scan playing for the older teams in the 80s and 90s. Nas Reed, he'll be a decent role player in the 80s and 90s. Jaime Jaquez, again, another solid role player in the 80s and 90s. Dogman Dort. I mean, if Joe Dumars can make it, yeah. If John Sally could play in the 80s and 90s, I think Lou Dort could play in the 80s and 90s too. A nice 3-and-D defender shooter. I say so. CJ McCollum. Every time I watch CJ McCollum, Carl Johnson McCollum get on the court, I don't see him do anything. Like, it's rare that he gets out and really just turn up. Especially ever since he got traded from Portland. I don't know. He might get RKO'd by somebody. I'm not sure. Marcus Smart. Maybe. Solid role player at best. Because really, they're just going to have him play defense. Probably for like a Detroit type of defense. But I think he could play. Mitchell Robinson. Inside center. He'll blend right in. Miles Turner. Yeah, because he's a stretch big. I could see that. Jeremy Grant. Role player. Van Vliet. Drake. Maybe. Because if... Not Muggsy Bogues. That's too short. If guards like Isaiah Thomas and Abdul Rauf, if those guards were very, very, very tough in the 80s and 90s, I feel like Fred VanVleet will be like the second or third point guard after them. I feel like he'll be a pretty decent off-the-bench playmaking shooter. Podziemski made the list at 78? Wow. Interesting. I would have thought they put Michael Porter a little higher than that then. If that's the case, they got Podziemski way up here at 78. Swing the Rock Porter should have been at least 80. Nobody's thinking about Jeremy Grant before Michael Porter. Podziemski, yeah, he played in a Steve Kerr role. Easily. McDaniels. Yeah. I can see that. Yeah. He'll play a Scottie Pippen type of role for a team. I mean, he's not like a super scorer like Scottie was either, but the defensive wise, I can see that. Jaden McDaniels being more like a Scottie Pippen, I can see it. Tyler Hero. I mean, I would have had McDaniels over Tyler Hero. But I guess he went up 3 overalls. Would he play in the 80s and 90s? Yeah, probably average like 5 points, if that. Because you got to think, like, the 80s and 90s is a different era, right? They're not shooting a whole bunch of threes. They can shoot threes, but not at the volume and the rating that they're shooting now. So then you go to guards like DiVincenzo's, who's majority off shooting threes. His game will be way different in the 80s and 90s. He'll be more of like a spot up shooter, maybe like a Chris Mullin, who was a shooter. I think Dante could play. Because again, if Chris Mullin, if he was a shooter and Mitch Richmond was a shooter, I think Dante would be a nice little pick and pop spot up shooter for a team in the 90s. Zach LaVine, yeah. From 38 to 74 is actually absurd. That's absurd. But he could play in the 80s, 90s. Scooby-Doo, Jared Allen. I mean, he's going to get bullied by, like, Shaq and them. He'd be like a third center off the bench. Because he's not going out there guarding like Hakeem and them and Shaq. Young Orlando Shaq and Alonzo Mourning and all them. I don't know. He might be like the second or third center off the sideline. Austin Reeves at 72. Yeah, because again, he'll be more like a spot-up shooter like Dante would be. Get to the basket here and there, but he'd be like a Chris Muller role. So I give him green light. Dang, Clay, you fell 30 spots. Yeah, Clay might get kicked out the league. Clay just not the same no more, bro. Like, if this was Clay like 5 years ago, absolutely he could play in the 80s and 90s. A two-way shooter. Clay out here going 0 for 9 now. Clay might get kicked out the league. He might be a custodian worker, bro. I'm not gonna lie. And that hurts, and it hurts with me to say that because I rock with Klay Thompson heavy, bro. I do. It's just like, man, like that 0 for 10 really just hurt his legacy. No matter what he's done, 60 points off 11 dribbles, 37 and a quarter, multiple championships, Game 6 Klay. It's just that 0 for 10 versus Sacramento is what people going to remember him for, which is very unfortunate. But the way how he's playing right now, he might be putting the fries in the bag. But Clay's 100% making the Hall of Fame, without a doubt. But as of right now, it's just, I don't know, I just don't see it. We're not putting Bradley Beal before Klay Thompson, though. That's what we're not doing. Because Bradley Beal did nothing when they was getting clapped by Anthony Edwards. He wasn't doing anything. So I don't know if I want to put Bradley Beal before Klay Thompson like that. Let's not get it twisted here. Bradley Beal would be like, he's coming off the bench in the 90s, in the 80s. Jalen Green will be really interesting to watch. He reminds me of like a young Vince Carter, athletically wise. Like, he can dunk, bro. If you watch his high school highlights, he can get up there. He can dunk with the best of them. Especially, you know, when them allegations was coming out. Oh, yeah, that was his final form. That was like his beginning of his final form. But I feel like Jalen Green is more like an early 2000s player than the 80s and 90s. My honest opinion. Brandon Miller, more like an Ingram role. I think he will blend more in the 2000s and not really 80s and 90s. I don't know if he's really relevant in the 80s and 90s, but I think he's more like an early 2000s player. I can see that. Cade Cunningham. Free Cade. Free Jalen Duren. Free Jaden Ivey. And free the Thompson twin. They don't deserve to play for Detroit. They didn't deserve to be having... They didn't deserve good basketball careers and then play for a 14-68 team. They're only good for 14 wins, bro. That's horrendous. Cade, he's, again, this is another early 2000s, maybe late 90s, early 2000s player because he's a big guard. So he's going to be like he might be like a slower Penny Hardaway, but I think he could last in that late 90s, early 2000s. I'll say that. Draymond Green, oh yeah, he's blending in any era. I don't care if it's the 70s. 70s, 80s, 90s. As long as you RKOing somebody, you making a roster. You might end up being a starter. You don't got to score. But if you can do this, absolutely. Draymond is 100% playing in the 90s. Because they was out there doing DDT moves. WWE moves all through the UFC off the cage in the 80s and 90s. He definitely survived. He blend right in with them. Malik Monk. He wasn't even ranked last year. Now he went from not ranked to 65th. Malik Monk. He'd be alright in the 90s, but he's more like the early 2000s. He's more like the Iverson era type of guard. He's a guard that plays with a lot of, not necessarily flash, but he could create his own shot at times. So he's more like the early 2000s. Quickly, 18-7. I'll get him an all-star game in the 80s and 90s. I mean, nobody really talks about Emmanuel Quickly at all, but if he's averaging 19-7 and 38 and shooting 40% from 3 in 38 games, I'll make him an all-star team in the 80s and 90s. Whether y'all believe that or not. That's not as bad as it sounds. Chris Middleton. Yeah, he'll play like a Joe Dumars role. The Vinnie Johnson, like a microwave type of role. Same with Quickly and Malik Monk. They played in the 80s and 90s, they'll be like a microwave type of role. Excuse me, Caldwell Pope. Oh, heck no. How is he? You telling me Caldwell Pope is better than Malik Monk? And Cade Cunningham? And Jalen Green? And even Bradley Beal and Reeves? Ain't no way they said Kentavious Caldwell Pope is better than all of them. What? Then they got Josh Hart after that? Whoa. Yeah, they're ESPN off the methamphetamine. What is they talking about? Pope definitely not in the league in the 90s. I'm just saying. Pope definitely not in the 90s. 90s, he just gonna be a shooter, and that's it. Josh Hart, I don't know what he brings to the table. He's a Swiss Army knife. He just a Swiss Army knife. I mean, as long as he's playing defense, he'll get in the game, but he's not gonna be like an all-star or nothing like that either, though. Bane, I guess that's solid where he at. He'll be alright. Probably like an early 2000s player, but I don't see too much 80s and 90s in his game. Alex Caruso, the bald eagle. Man, he went from unranked to 59. I don't know if I see him playing basketball in the 80s and 90s. He might be an actor. He might have been playing an acting role in Scarface or something. I don't know. I don't see Alex Caruso being in the NBA in the 80s and 90s. Maybe, but then again, I don't know. Kobe Cheese, Kobe White. 1905 and 78 starts. He'll be solid. Solid second string player. Darius Garland, he could play in the 80s and 90s and in the early 2000s. His game, he has a very shifty type of. His game is shifty, but it's controlled. From 36th to 57th is absurd as well. His game is very smooth, shifty, and controlled. So I could see him playing in the 80s, 90s, and the 2000s, being a very solid, if not second string, he could be a starter for a few teams. Derek Lively. Yeah. Again, he might either be a second string or a starter. He has potential. He has a very good pick and roll, spectacular finisher, as ESPN calls it, 141 dunks. Yeah, he's going to have to be in the All-Star dunk contest if he's dunking that many times in a year. Jaren Jackson. Yeah, he'll be a nice defender like a Karl Malone. I see Jaren Jackson playing a Karl Malone role. Segun. I mean, he'd probably be like Arvidas Sabonis. Nice little big guard, power forward, center, point forward, making plays for his team. I can see him making it happen. Yeah, he'd probably be like a poor man's Arvidas. RJ Barrett. I don't know. I don't know if I seen him playing basketball in the 80s and 90s. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know if I see it. Like, he's not a bad player. I just don't know if I see him playing in the 80s and 90s. 22-4. I mean, that's all-star numbers in the 80s and 90s as well, but I don't know. It's just like RJ Barrett. Do y'all think about RJ Barrett that often to be 53rd on the list? I don't know. Franz Wagner being 52nd, so he's pretty much staying the same. 7 30-point games last year. It instantly brought up his contract. 5-year, $224 million. Yeah, he could play in the 90s, early 2000s. Solid point forward. And Anobis. Nah, I could see him playing for the Knicks in the 90s. When they was over there fighting the Heat, I could see him blending in there. All right, so that's the 100 through 50. 51, so now we have 50 through 11. What we talking about? LaMelo Ball at 50. I can see him playing in the 90s. Mainly because if you have Magic Johnson, if you have Penny Hardaway, LaMelo Ball, if it wasn't for his injuries, he could play in the 90s and early 2000s without a doubt. I feel like he's only 50th because of his injuries really set him back a lot from him and his full potential. Because you can see he's averaging 24, 8 assists, and just over 5 rebounds a game. I can see it. I can see him playing in the 90s, early 2000s, the way how his play style is. Aaron Gordon, early 2000s. More like a Josh Smith, Amari Stoudemire. Kind of like a little degraded Amari Stoudemire type of game. I can see it. Early 2000s. Julius Randle. I know Julius Randle has like an attitude problem. I mean, he's kind of like hit and miss. That's why I don't know if he's like a second string or out the league at times. Because Julius Randle, there's times where he looks like an all-star like last year. And there's times where it's like, what are you doing? So, I'd say he could play in the 80s. But the 90s, I don't know. They might end up having to elbow him in his jawline or something. I don't know. What's his name? Kevin Garnett? He ain't having that. So, I say probably 80s type of player. Evan Mobley, he could play in the 90s. You look at players like Akeem Olajuwon, tall, lanky centers. I could see it. Porzingis. Yeah, Porzingis would be a demi. And that's only because he's like a stretch big. So he'd probably be a demi in the 90s, early 2000s. DeMar DeRozan. Yeah. He wouldn't be Jordan, but he'll have a Jordan-like mid-range in the 90s, early 2000s. Jalen Will. Yeah, I can see it. I could see it being an all-star defensive player of the year in the 90s. DeJounte Murray. DeJounte Murray is not better than DeMar DeRozan. I don't think I'm picking DeJounte Murray. And DeJounte Murray's not a bad player either. I just don't know if I'm picking him before DeMar DeRozan. I just don't see it. Unless he proved me wrong this year. When it was with the Hawks, I just didn't see it. Siakam. And he went from 25 to 42. That's tragic. Mm. Oh, Murray's probably like a 2000s type of player. Siakam is probably 90s. His game reminds me of players in the 90s. James Harden is 41. Yeah, he fell off. James Harden back in 2017 would have been top 10 in the league. This man fell off like crazy. Again, same with Clay and Chris Paul. If this is James Harden back in his MVP years, could play in any era. He'll be a nightmare in any era in his early years. Now, I don't know. He might be selling cotton candy. Because again, there's times with Paul George. I'm not Paul George. See his name right here. James Harden. There's times where he's hooping, and then there's times where it's just like he's wearing a fat suit. So I could see him playing in the 90s if he's really hooping. But as far as this James Harden, but then I don't know. James Harden kind of like flaky at times. Ingram, yeah, Derek White top 39. Ingram could play in the 2000s. Derek White, he's definitely coming off the bench. Derek White, I mean, he's a solid pickup though. He may be bald headed, the Mr. Clean, but he's a solid pickup though. He is. He did nothing for Team USA. He just sat there and got a gold medal for free. But when he was with the Celtics, he was a bootleg Klay Thompson. So I'll say he's a nice little 2000s player. But you would definitely coming off the bench 100%. I don't know who he's starting over. But anyway, Mikal Bridges. The only way he'll be an all-star is if he played in the 80s. He might be decent in the 90s, in the 2000s, but he'll really be an all-star in the 80s. Mikal Bridges. Like, his aura gives, like, George Gervin. Like, he has that. Like, it's okay, especially since he started doing this. But, like, outside of that, like, he okay. Trae Young. Yeah. Because Abdul Rauf was playing. If Abdul Rauf was playing for Denver Nuggets in the 90s, Trae Young could play in the 90s. 100%. Drew Holiday. Yeah. Nice little two-way defending shooter. I think he could be a good role player. Good spark plug off the bench for any team in the 90s, 2000s, 80s. He might be a superstar. Scotty Barnes at 35. All right, I guess. Nice point forward. Early 2000s type of player. I can see it. Rudy Gobert better than Scotty Barnes? I don't know. Rudy Gobert was over there tap dancing, guarding Luka. That's the defensive player of the year. I don't know. I don't. Because when he go up against Shaq, Alonzo Mourning, Hakeem Olajuwon, when you got to go up against like real deal centers, I don't know if Rudy is even guarding them. He might get elbowed and stiff armed out the league, maybe. I don't even know. He's definitely getting teabagged by Vince Carter. Vince Carter gonna try him for sure. I could see it. Tracy McGrady, even Kobe might have tried him. But I mean, he'd be decent, but he not gonna be doing nothing spectacular. Lauri Markkanen. Yeah, we should have got Lauri Markkanen this offseason. I don't know what happened with that. But yeah, I can see Lauri Markkanen be a solid player in the 90s, 80s. Chet Holmgren at 7 foot. I see him making an impact in the 90s, 2000s. Jamal Murray is definitely a 2000s player. 100%. He will blend right in the 2000s. The way how he plays, the way how he moves on the court. 31. Jamal Murray is at least top 30 though. 31 is I mean, it's kind of the same thing, but I would put him in the top 30 from where he was 17th last year. Cat, 30. No, I ain't gonna lie. Sabonis top 30 over Murray. I don't know. Karl Anthony Towns. You know what's crazy? Karl Anthony Towns, I think he'll be really good. Like, really good in the 80s. 90s, 2000s, early 2000s, he'll be playing the same way how he plays now. Fell down 10 rankings is tough. But I feel like he'll be an all-star in the 90s through early 2000s. Nah, not early 2000s. He'll be an all-star, but not a superstar. Let's say that. Because superstars in the early 2000s was ridiculous. Like Vince, Tracy McGrady, Iverson, young LeBron, Kobe, Carmelo, D Wade, young Dwight when he was Superman. He'll be like the layer under them. Because he is a nice stretch big when he want to shoot threes correctly. Because that playoff performance, he was shooting nothing but bricks. He built a mansion. But when he's hooping, he could at least be the top 25 when he's hooping. Sabonis, I mean, he might play like his dad. So I think he'll survive in the 2000s. Jimmy Butler, 28. Jimmy is kind of weird like that. Like, when March come around, that's when he want to play like Jordan. But October through February, it's like he plays mid. Like, October through February, he's mid. Then March, he's Jordan. So, is he 2000s, 90s? He's like Cat. Like, he's that layer, that all-star type of player, but he's not crazy. Let's say that. Zion Williamson has so much potential to be a monster. Like Charles Barkley type of monster. Like, Zion could really be an issue if he's healthy. And, he looks healthy from the press conference when the season started. He looks healthy. So maybe he might come out here and be a monster this year. 23-5. I see him averaging about a cool 26 when healthy. I can see it. De'Aaron Fox, absolutely can play in the early 2000s. 90s. 2000s, definitely. Kyrie Irving. Oh, he's going to dominate. 2000s is his definite era. That's that and one era too. Oh yeah, Kyrie's definitely destroying. He's gonna be a wizard. If Allen Iverson was doing that, I could only imagine Kyrie Irving in the early 2000s, bro. That would be insane. Insane. Ben Caro, he'll be an all-star in the early 2000s. I don't know about the 90s too much, but the early 2000s, he'll be an all-star. I can see it. Dame Lillard. Now, with him, this Oakland family, by the way. With Dame Lillard, though, like, he could... There's some teams he'll start on, and there's some teams that might just do him wrong and have him come off the bench. But Dame Lillard definitely could be an all-star. Because he be hooping. Like, when he own one, he really own one. No biasness. 24-7. When he's healthy, he's on that. So he could definitely be solid in the 2000s, early 2000s era. That's that Gilbert Arenas too. Oh yeah, he could fit in right there with Gilbert Arenas, easily. Allen Iverson. Now Kawhi, I heard Kawhi got hurt again with some inflammatories. Yeah, it says, I've seen it right here. He's experienced inflammation in his surgically repaired right knee, which means it's times where it just starts hurting, or the injury just kind of flares up out of nowhere. Young Kawhi easily is top 3 defender in the league in the 2000s and in the 90s. He might be up there with Scottie Pippen, guarding Jordan in the finals type beat. But then it's the other half where he just needs to be resurgically done, bro. He has this lots of loose bolts and oil dripping out the robot. You know, it's like, man, like you just want to see Kawhi get out there and do great. When healthy, he top 5 forward in the league, top 7 forward in the league when healthy. But then the other half is just like when the playoff come around, it's like he got to reboot. He got to get sent to the shop. Paul George. Prayers to Paul George, by the way. He had a hyperextended knee. The knees went like these, though. Did all type of crazy stuff. But Paul George, I think, would be really good in the 2000s. Really good player in the 2000s. Is he a superstar? Maybe a Tracy McGrady-ish type of player. Because I've seen people kind of like hating on Paul George a little bit, saying that people glaze and praise Paul George like how people glazed and praised Tracy McGrady in the 2000s. They treat Paul George how they treated Tracy McGrady. Meaning it's kind of like overglazed or overpraised, as they say. I think Paul George is he'll be really good, decent in the 90s, but 2000s would be his era if he's not in our current era. John Morant at 20. So this is where we start to get good at. Now he be great in the 80s and 90s, but they not letting those 6'2" John Morant fly over them either. Like how Ja dunked on Victor. Hakeem is not going for that. Because Hakeem, Garnett, all the other centers, they gonna try to test his manhood anytime he try to jump with them. So I would say he'd be an elite level guard in the 90s. 2000s again will be his era. I think a lot of these players would blend in the 2000s, but not really in the 90s. I just don't see it. John Morant will blend in very well with the 2000s, especially that Iverson 01 era, definitely. Maxey, TJ Maxx, 2000s. Because in the 80s and 90s, he's definitely coming off the bench. They're going to do him all wrong. 2000s has to be his era. But for him to go from, even Morant to go from 35 to 20, and he has a lot to prove with those suspensions. Maxey going from 42 to 19 says a lot to how much work he put in. So I definitely say 2000s player. Adebayo, yeah, I can't see him playing in the 80s and 90s. I don't. He'll get a face scan, but he'll be like that one guy you don't remember playing for the certain teams. Like Antoine Walker on the Heat. He'll be that kind of guy. Like he did play for the Heat back then type of dude. Bam is a great player, but he would fit in the 2000s. Donovan Mitchell, 2000s player, easily. Halliburton. I don't know what era you belong in. I guess you could say 2000s because the Steve Nash. Even players like Donovan Mitchell, Maxey, John Morant, Lillard, Kyrie, De'Aaron Fox. All these guards are more than likely early 2000s. Steve Nash, Stephon Marbury-ish type of players. They'll have the league lit though. But Tyrese Halliburton definitely can't play in the 80s and 90s. I just don't see that happening at all. They gonna put him in a headlock in the 90s, 80s. He might be just warming up seats like the Olympics. He might get a free championship. Who knows? Yeah, see, he even says comparisons of the likes of Steve Nash. So yeah, he's early 2000s. Answer my question. Top 15, Devin Booker at 15. Let's look up some players in the 2000s. Let's look up some players. Early 2000s basketball players. Shooting guards. Yeah, Devin Booker, he'll be like a Reggie Miller, Brandon Roy, Rip Hamilton type of player. He could survive in the 2000s. Maybe not too much of the 80s and 90s. His game is kind of too bland. Then again, it wasn't too crazy in the 80s and 90s either, but I see Devin Booker thriving more in the 2000s. Again, more like a Brandon Roy or Rip Hamilton type of player. Jaylen Brown, I think he'll be really good in the 90s. The way how he played this year. 2000s, he'll be an all-star. Not a superstar, an all-star. Because, again, you got to think about certain shooting guards in the 2000s, like McGrady and Kobe and them. Jaylen Brown, he could play in the 2000s. Anthony Davis, when healthy, can play in any era. We being honest, Anthony Davis can play in any era when healthy. 80s, 90s, and early 2000s when healthy. If Anthony Davis, this is a hot take, if Anthony Davis plays on the 76ers in that 2001 finals, they win in at least 2 games. If Allen Iverson had an Anthony Davis, they're winning at least 2 games. They might end up effing around winning the finals over Shaq and Kobe. Because you know Allen Iverson, he was balling in that game 1. Excuse me. It just, after that, it was just over with. Kobe pretty much just teed up. Kobe and Shaq teed up. But if Allen Iverson had Anthony Davis and not Anthony McKee and the old Dikembe Mutombo, RIP to Dikembe. If he would have had Anthony Davis, they would have effed around and might have won and beat the Lakers if AD was there. Jalen Brunson. Oh, yeah. The way how he was playing this year. Let me see some guards. Point guards. Yeah, Chris Paul, Chauncey Billups, Jason Kidd, Tony Parker-ish. Even a Darren Williams type of player, Mike Bibby. Steve Franchise Francis. I could definitely see Jalen Brunson playing in the 2000s. He might be coming off the bench in the 90s, but 2000s, absolutely. He can blend right in with that. Chauncey Billups, Jason Kidd, Tony Parker, Darren Williams, Steve Francis, Jason Williams type of players, even Stephon Marbury type. I could see him playing in the 2000s. Victor at 11. Victor would be an alien. Victor, I don't think would even. Victor would be unheard of in the 90s. The way how he moved is different. Now, of course, there were 7-footers in the 90s, 2000s, but the way how he played is way different. He played way different than you think. So Victor is easily surviving in any era, to be honest with you. The reason why we're talking this much in this list, Anthony Rejected. I see him being an all-star in the 90s. Really good in the early 2000s. All-star in the 90s. Early 2000s, he'll be really good. Like, he'll be like that shade right under McGrady. A healthy Tracy McGrady, Vince Carter. Because he has the tapes. He has the dunks to prove that he can survive in them eras. He just got to stop talking crazy to everybody because they not having it in them old eras. He know that. He know that because he not talking to Kobe and Jordan like that, like how he be talking and clapping in Jalen Brunson's face and all that. They're not going for that in the 2000s. But I think he'll play really well in those eras. What is his biggest question? How will Anthony Edwards respond to becoming an unquestioned number one option in Minnesota? Do the same thing he did last year. Simple as that. Kevin Durant easily can play in any era. We don't got to talk about that too much. Filled 2 spots, I guess. Embiid, when healthy, dude dropped 60 this year, 70, something like that this year. When healthy, he's an alien as well. He was number 3 last year. That's interesting. I didn't forgot about that. Embiid could definitely hang when healthy. He could bang down there with Shaq when healthy. Keyword when healthy. When his eyes is not glitching and all that, I could see it. LeBron at number 7. This is probably the he was number 9 last year. Wow. That's probably the lowest LeBron has ever been in his career in this top 100 list. He went from number 9 to number 7. I think that Team USA probably rose him up a couple of spots. Steph Curry, number 6. Steph Curry, number 6. We got LeBron, number 7. Embiid, number 8. KD, number 9. And Anthony Edwards, number 10. So I'm assuming the top 5 got to be Shea, Luka, Giannis, Jokic. Who else? Curry could play in the era. My fault. I forgot. LeBron obviously is playing in any era. Duh. Old. He played in every era. Borderline, except the 80s and 90s. He didn't play in every era. He didn't show it. We ain't got to talk about LeBron. Curry. I'm going to be honest with you about Steph Curry, right? Because I had this conversation recently. Somebody told me that Steph Curry would average 60 in the 80s and 90s. I see Curry averaging about a cool 30 to 32. Maybe at least he will average what he averages now, which is like 27, 28. But he ain't averaging no 60. These 80s and 90 teams, if they did Jordan the way how they did him and threw him in headlocks, they're not letting this 6'2 light skin, 6'3 light skin get open and shoot 10 threes a game. Make 10, 12, 13 threes a game. They're not letting that happen. I can already see that now. They're going to start doing the most suplex. Anytime he shoot, knock him, almost break his rib cage. They're not allowing him to average no 60 points in those 80s and 90s. That's not happening. He'll average probably like a cool 32. Like what Shea and Luka average right now is probably what Curry will average in the 80s and 90s. Will he survive? Absolutely. But averaging 60 is too much. He only dropped 60 twice in his career in this era. There's no way he's averaging 60 in the 90s. I mean, defense, again, is way different in the 90s and early 2000s because hand checking was allowed. Now you can't hand check. You can't land in the shooter's landing space. Back then, none of that really mattered. So they're going to rough Steph Curry up to the fullest max potential. So, in my opinion, of course, Curry, I think, will survive, but averaging 60 is a little absurd. And again, he's only dropped 60 twice in his own era, so averaging 60 is a little too much. Tatum's top 5. Tatum better than Curry. Tatum better than Curry. Nah, you gotta flip that. You gotta flip Curry with Tatum, bro. Tatum is not better than Steph Curry, bro. Tatum wanna be Curry. Tatum wanna be Kobe to the fullest of fullest. He eat, sleep, and breathe wanna be Kobe. But being better than Curry, you gotta flip that. I'm not gonna lie. Because I was thinking, like, who is left? It was Tatum. Now Tatum, he had a good year last year. Don't get me wrong, but better than Curry. Mm. Maybe because he won the championship, they gave him the nod. But Jaylen Brown was in the top 20, 19. Jaylen Brown should be in the top 15. Oh, so he is top 15. Okay, I had to recheck again. Last year he was top 20 at 19. 14 and Jason Tatum is 5. Nah, that means Jaylen Brown got to be up here by 11, 12. No way. Jaylen Brown got to be at least 11. Well, he was playing. Now, I would switch Victor with Jaylen Brown. Well, he was playing in this postseason. I got to get him the nod. But Tatum, 2000s. Might be like a Paul Pierce-ish type of player. Maybe even a Danny Granger in the early 2000s. But I'm not sure if he's like 90s, 80s ready. You know what I mean? Like, you got to mess with Larry Bird and Dr. J and Dominique flying over you and Vince Carter flying over you. No, he getting teabagged by Dominique. I ain't gonna lie. Dominique is teabagging Jason Tatum. But, yeah, Tatum would have to play in the 2000s. Shea Gilgeous, number 4. Shea's so smooth. He could play in the... He's definitely 2000s. Off rip. 2000s. Easily. 90s, yeah. Because if Penny Hardaway can play, Shea definitely playing. Yeah. Because Shea, he be diddy bopping players too. He be mid-range jump shots. He be diddy bopping on players. So I would say, yeah, Shea could play in the late 90s, 2000s. I could see it. Oh, this African deer, he can play in the 60s and be a Spartan. Giannis, this African could play in the 50s and be the greatest of all time. Giannis will never lose. The only competition he has is Bill Russell and Will Chamberlain. And the rest is lawyers. Doctors, lawyers, plumbers. And he went from number 1 to number 3. So I'm just assuming that Luka is number 1 this year. Yeah, Giannis any era, to be honest with you. Luka's number 2. Jokic number 1 this year? Wow. Yeah, Luka could play in any era. He just moved really slow. I feel like Luka would be unguardable in the 80s. Well, no, because that's Larry Bird era. He'll be right there with Larry Bird as far as scoring goes. Defensively, he's getting fried. We've seen it in the finals. He's getting fried. He moves really slow, but he could play in the 80s and 90s. 2000s, they running him out the gym. I'm not going to lie. So he would have to play in a very slow-paced 80s type of era. Because 90s, Jordan flying over Luka. He flying right by him. Dominique, Vince Carter, Tracy, when they healthy, yeah, they flying over, dude. I ain't going to lie. Jokic, number 1 player in the league. Yeah. Because Jokic's game is not crazy. Jokic is just turn face, turn face, turn face, this, turn face, that. It's not nothing crazy, but it gets the job done. So Jokic, he can ride his horses in the early 80s, 90s, 2000s, he get away with it. I can see it. I could see Jokic being very effective if Arvydas Sabonis was a great player. He's definitely Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Yeah. Bill Russell, Will Chamberlain. Oh, yeah, Jokic definitely surviving. Easily. So, yeah, that's it. That's 100 through 1 of ESPN's top 100 players. Would they be able to survive in the 80s and 90s? Oh yeah, that's another thing about Rudy Gobert. He got to guard Hakeem and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and all them. Shaq, Alonzo Mourning, he might get stiff arm elbowed in the chest. I just thought about that just now. Like Jared Allen, he's getting stiff arm in his esophagus. He might do this. He might run like Shaggy from Scooby Doo. He gonna get elbowed in the neck. It's gonna be all bad for him with the headband on. Headband coming smooth off. They gotta play them super strong black men like that. GG's. Anyways, that's pretty much it for this video, man. We done went through 100 players. Now, part 2 will be the old school players playing in this era, if they can survive or not, in my honest opinion. Make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe if you're new to the channel. If you subscribe, I really appreciate it. I'm going to see you guys in the next video, man.